All right, Steve, we'll go ahead and get started.
Sure, sounds good. Well, I appreciate the reach out, and um, glad I was able to give you guys a bit of something. Am I the only presenter today?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I hope I can make your evening worthwhile here. So we'll get started. I just thought I put together some slides just to give you an idea of what's possible with Exchange Web Services and PowerShell. Has anyone, I guess, can we do a roundtable of people that's there and in regards to what everyone's background is and what they currently do?
So
Do we have any Exchange administrators or?
Primarily Windows.
So we have one that's primarily Windows admin.
I'm a sysadmin cover everything.
Yeah, so then we have a generalist, what I would call another. Then we have a generalist who basically has to wear the 40 different hats that a generalist has to wear every day.
Correct. We do have Office 365, so that for us.
That's about it so far.
Okay. No. Well, hopefully some of this will be useful. If not, it kind of shows what's possible with, and you may run into situations that I've run in and know that PowerShell can be your solution. So just introduce myself, my personal Twitter account, STP Farms. I also tweet out my articles on PowerShell blog. PowerShellBlogger.com is my domain name. I was trying to post there as much as possible, and I'm based out of Boston, Massachusetts. Technologies I work on, mostly unified communications is a good chunk of my time. Skype and Exchange. I do automation through Orchestrator, Service Manager, Puppet, directory services, Active Directory identity management, remote desktop services through Remote App or Citrix Zen products, and there's core services, Windows services, as well as Office 365. A lot of my work is just migration work, just going from Lotus, Novell, Google, Cisco technology to Microsoft technologies around mail, identities, unified communications, or just within the Microsoft technology upgrades. I really try to keep up to date on as many products as possible, just to keep myself relevant and available at depending on what a client or prospective client would need. So as a result, Microsoft implemented PowerShell heavily with Exchange administration, and then has broadened that across all their products. And so as a result, I do spend a lot of time in PowerShell, really not as for every task, but for a lot of tasks where it's the best solution. And that doesn't mean I replace it for everything. I still use Robocopy and would never use PowerShell for certain type of tasks, but it's usually pretty good at what it can do, and one of the best, if not best, scripting languages that I use. So we'll just kind of talk about Exchange Web Services. So Exchange Web Services allows for coded solutions that access Exchange mailbox data from online or on-premise. You can pretty much access almost all information stored in Exchange Online as part of Office 365 or an on-prem mailbox. It's predominantly used to create client-based applications to replace or enhance Outlook functionality. But you can combine PowerShell and Exchange Web Services to allow for scripted solutions, changes required across a large number of mailboxes. So depending on the size of the organization, if you need to make a change across 50 or more mailboxes, it comes in handy. When you start getting into mailbox or organizations of 10,000 or more, then it becomes a savior. No, I've had a chance to use Exchange Web Services on several scenarios, and I'm going to talk about 5 use cases that I've used it for within a large organization. So the following 5 use cases are real-world scenarios. These scenarios may exist in your environment someday, and really highlights the possibility with EWS and PowerShell. So this is my first use case, and it's managing personal contacts. So we have a domain.com changes to newdomain.com. All saved personal contacts in Outlook, in Exchange, in every mailbox will remain as domain.com post-migration. So there's no automated way, there's no way Exchange is going to go in and change everyone's personal contact for you. The gal will change, but not anytime someone has saved that address book entry to their personal contacts, it remains the old address. So if you're trying to get rid of an old domain name, or a problem really arises in Link or Skype, what happens is you'll see 2 entries for users within your organization. You'll actually see one user that's offline or non-existent anymore, and then you'll have their new user. And we went through about a 15,000 user migration where during our testing phase, it was just changing that domain name was causing like a lot of frustration with the pilot, having all these extra contacts. So really there's no way to utilize any built-in PowerShell scripting to go in and change personal contacts. So that's where PowerShell and Exchange Web Services came into play. Basically, you log in to each mailbox through Exchange impersonation. You create a view of their contacts. You basically go through each contact entry doing a find for the old domain that you want to switch to, and then you replace that contact with the new domain. So depending on how you roll out the new domain, you can feed it a list of look for these specific users with the domain name and change it to the new domain, or you could just find all contacts with the old domain and replace it to the new domain. You save the contact, and then you solve the problem. So that helped us out a lot in a domain change migration. Here's another one where it came in real handy, managing a SharePoint list. So a GPO was used to push out a SharePoint list to all Outlook profiles. So they thought it was a really good idea at the time that everyone had a standard SharePoint list. The problem is once you get the SharePoint list there, it registers with the MAPI profile on Outlook, but then it saves it in their online mailbox, and there's no way to get that mailbox, that SharePoint list out, other than having the user manually going in and removing it. So what happened was the server required decommissioning. It was old, out of SharePoint 2007. They wanted to turn it off. When they tried to turn it off, every single Outlook was complaining that the SharePoint server didn't exist anymore. And so they were keeping around this old server, unable to turn it off. So same way, no real solution to get that off of the mailbox. If you've administered Exchange before, you know the limitations from the PowerShell side is that it's really managing the mailbox, not as much the contents of the mailbox. You can export and import, but you can't get too granular other than that. So what I did is I created an item view of the mailbox route, and you look for a sharing remote path property. And then you just iterate through each of the objects that you get from the route. you find the old path, and you can either do a replace if you wanted to upgrade the server, or you could just delete the entry. So we just deleted the entry. It ran for a couple hours going through all the mailboxes, and then they were able to shut the server down. And a lot of these things would just not be possible without Exchange Web Services. You'd probably have to do some sort of MAPI connection through creating a profile for each user. And then if you ever try to do MAPI programming, you get lost pretty quick, or I do anyways. So I use Exchange Web Services for everything. Use case number 3, managing calendar entries. So company A has a 10% reduction in workforce. If you have 10,000 users or 15,000 users, we're looking at 1,000 to 1,500 users that are leaving. So this is affecting thousands of meetings. Non-active meetings will remain on users' calendars. Hundreds of conference rooms retain all these abandoned meetings. So you could technically, with PowerShell out of the box, you could search through the meeting rooms and find all the entries that were from the disabled users and wipe them out. But then you'd have to really do that across every single user, and then you would lose potentially lose important information from the meetings. If they had previous ones, or if you put a date range on it, they would just disappear. It's just not a very clean way of doing it. So what a company was going to do, they were going to hire like 30 people to cancel these meetings over the course of a few days, and just log into everyone's mailbox and manually go through all their meetings and cancel them. And I said there has to be a way to do it with another way. So I came up with a solution where you basically log into each affected mailbox, you create a view of all their meetings in the calendar, you take an action on each item, and you cancel the meeting and send a cancellation notice. So now you're targeting just the people that left, and you're doing a proper cancellation where it cancels the meeting. Because what can happen if you just wipe it off the calendar is the calendar repair assistant will just come along, and it might just recreate it and find it on other people's calendars, and if you don't time it properly, it'll just come back. So this is a proper way of canceling the meeting. And when I was researching this, and I had to create a lot of these are all the things I've had to create from scratch, and had to use Exchange Web Services C# documentation to expand upon. But I saw a need out there that person A leaves the company, we want to get rid of all of the calendar entries. The person leaves the company, and we need the calendar entries to be gone. Most of the time they want to transfer the meetings, and you can't do that. But a lot of times they would rather cancel it. So this is a good solution for that. And this is the one use case which I'll do a demo of, and we'll go through how you'll go about canceling meetings for a user. So here's use case number 4. So users manage several regular or ad hoc linked Skype meetings. Domain changes from domain.com to olddomain.com. Or maybe a user changes their name, which will essentially change their SIP address from their old name to new domain, to new name. The problem is all meetings that person has created are tied to their old SIP address. When you create a new SIP address, going forward, all those meetings are broken. No one will be able to join them. And the only solution Microsoft has is the desktop client that essentially the user has to manually launch, and it'll go. It connects to their Outlook profile. It lists all their meetings. It does a find and replace of theirs, and they manually send them out. But when you're doing this across a large organization, really not feasible. So with PowerShell, basically you can retrieve the new SIP address or SIP domain for the user. It's easier if you're just changing the domain and not the whole name of the person, but you can just do a find and replace on the domain name, and then log into each affected mailbox, find the affected calendar entries, do a find and replace, and then you send an updated calendar entry. So this is another example that saved, countless hours. This is another one, last one. A lot of people, and I see this with mail migrations, have Outlook or GroupWise or notes-based mailer plugins that save sent items in the mailbox to preserve copies. Usually a scripted solution will utilize SMTP for outgoing mail. SMTP really, almost all the time, it just acts as a send-only function. So it just sends it, and there's no saved copy, no record. A lot of times they want that saved sent copy. So really easy solution with PowerShell. You just script a solution to accept 2CC. You create a small mailer, probably 8 to 10 lines, and then you use the message send and save copy method through an Exchange Web Services connection, and then it'll save each outbound email. So any questions before we get started on the demo?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. So really, just to get started, you just need to download the Exchange Web Services API, and it's at version 2.2 now. And so it provides support up to Exchange 2007 through to 2016, or Exchange Online. Just install that. You can place it in the default directory, and then we'll kind of go through what you need to do on your tenant or Exchange Online mailbox or your Exchange on-prem server. And we'll get started on that. So the first thing we need to do is let's connect to our tenant. So I'm going to use Exchange Online as examples. I don't have to show you a business-related Exchange server, but the same steps apply to either. A little bit different here. So the first thing we're going to do is connect to our tenant. We'll create. So we just created we created our credentials to connect. We'll create an Exchange session. So we're just using outlook.office365.com. This would be your webmail.company.com or whatever you use that has, Exchange Web Services on it. And you have to have the PowerShell virtual directory available. And now we'll just import the session.
Hey, Steve, is it possible to kind of
Talk you through what's happening here?
make the font a little bit bigger so we can see?
Oh, sure. Okay. So we just basically created an Exchange session with Office 365 on our online tenant. So the first thing you have to do to create an impersonation role is, if you haven't already, you have to enable organization customization. So I'm going to run this. It's going to say it's already complete, but what they do in Office 365 is by default Exchange has a lot of customization hidden because they want to save space on the servers. So this just enables the ability to create the exchange impersonation role. So to create the role, we just use the new management role assignment. We give it a name, so this is just the role assignment name, and then we say what role we would like to give it. So application impersonation is the name of the role that we're assigning. And then the user here is just a user within Office 365 that you want to give impersonation rights to all other users. Impersonation is the ability to log in as someone else even though you're not that person. So you wouldn't give it to everyone, but you'd give it to like a secure service account or an admin that would require to jump in to other people's mailboxes and be able to act on behalf of them. So it's just like the send as property with the full mailbox permissions. We'll go ahead and assign that role to our user. And then that's it from the tenant level. Everything else will be a connection from our workstation. So we'll just go ahead and remove the exchange session. And we have no get mailbox available to us, and we have no PowerShell sessions. So next step now, we'll walk through getting us connected to our mailbox. So we'll start by getting our password that we want to use for the service account. So we'll start that off with, we'll go ahead and read in the password, and we're going to save it to a file just so we don't keep the password as plain text in our script. And we're going to save it as a secure string, and then we'll convert it after. So I'll put in the password. This is the password to that impersonation account. So if we go ahead and we were to look at password, it's just a secure string. So then we take the password, we will output it to our password text file. So we'll convert from secure string and put it in our password.text. It's actually probably ended, so I'll have to run this whole thing again, because if I just do that, it's probably going to be empty. So we'll go ahead and run it all again. We'll put in my password. Okay, so now we'll just go ahead and we'll run Notepad. We'll make sure it's there. And there's our password as a secure string. So now the reason why we're doing this is we have to bring that password back in, and that password is really only usable on this profile on this computer. There's different ways to make passwords secure in a file across any computer, and we won't cover it here. Or if you don't care, you could just put in the password plain text, and it would read it. The problem is that you can't pass, basically when we authenticate to Exchange with basic authentication, you can't pass it a secure string, you have to pass it a plain text string. So to get it back to a plain text string, we have to do a little bit of magic. So I'll go through that. You can't really do it by default with convert from or convert to secure string.
We like that.
So we'll start our script off by doing some variables. So username, that's the impersonation service account. Office 365, you have to use the domain.com as opposed to the short name with domain that you're probably used to online or on-prem. Here we're going to get the password string from the password text file. Then we are going to convert that password string to a secure string. So if we were to, when we pull this password text file in, it's just that all it is a string of that super long number that we saw. Now we're converting it to a secure string that we can use in credentials. We can't use it in the web services credentials. So what we do is create PowerShell credential object. We pass it this username and the secure string it grabbed from the password. And when we're done that, we can actually pull the password in plain text by referencing the get network credential method from the credentials that we saved, and then there's the password attribute in plain text. And what we'll do is, since we want to impersonate someone else, we want to list who we want to impersonate. So I want to get into John Doe's mailbox, cancel his meetings. So let's go ahead and we'll log into John Doe's mailbox. And let's create some meetings so that we can cancel and find. Okay, so now we have a mailbox here. This is John Doe's mailbox. Let's go ahead and create some calendar events. Okay, so we'll go ahead and add myself. Let's make some meetings. The Tuesday afternoon event. We'll send that off. Let's create a reoccurring meeting. Let's make it Wednesday, repeat. Every Wednesday, we'll make it in the morning. Then we want to end, let's put an end date of June 8th. Test Wednesday. Let's add people. Create a new calendar event. We'll do an all day on the 24th. Well, let's do the 23rd. All day. All day event. We don't want to be free. Might get busy. Okay, so we have a few in there. We'll go ahead and check our calendar. So I got some meetings in here from before. Now let's go accept some of them here on my account. Okay, so we're in. Okay, so here's his meetings. We'll go ahead and accept them. Go check the calendar. So here I have a bunch of meetings from John throughout the month. So John leaves the company. I got all these meetings. We want to get rid of them. So let's go ahead and do that. So here we have, so far we have the username. We were able to save it to a password text file. We convert it back to a secure string. Then we utilize the plain text password for connecting to Exchange Web Services. So that's what we'll do now. First thing we have to do is load the Exchange Web Services API. So we'll do that with the following. So we just basically are pointing to the Web Services DLL, adding a type so that basically the rest of the application, you're basically kind of registering it so that it knows where, it knows all of the entries that are methods and everything that are available within Web Services. Now we will connect to the mail service. So the first thing I'm going to do is utilize Autodiscover, and then I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of either doing it that way or manually coding the location. So we do that first. Let's create Exchange Web Services object, and this is where you would type basically the version of Exchange you're using. You could type in 2010 here and it would still connect, but you wouldn't have as many options open to you. I think this script, everything here would be 2010 compatible because I used it on a 2010, I think SP2 environment. So we're connecting to Exchange 2016, and this is where we provide the web credentials of our username and password. Now we're going to do an auto discover against our target mailbox. So we want to use auto discover if your mailboxes exist across multiple front ends. So if your Exchange environment has multiple webmail, like not basically multiple sites where not everyone is homed on the same front end address space, then you would use auto discover so that when you type in the target mailbox, it redirects the user to where they are. If you have hybrid and some users are online and some are on-prem, you'd have to use auto discover, and that just tells the client where to find the mailbox. So we just do that by setting the auto discover URL to the target mailbox, and then this true here allows you to connect to a redirected server. So if you have hybrid enabled, what would happen, and you're still pointing to on-prem, it's going to do a CNAME to Outlook Office 365, and it's going to complain that it's trying to redirect you, and it's like a security feature trying to stop you from connecting to it. So by hard coding true here, you're basically saying no, allow for redirection. Now, we'll go ahead and run this script that we have so far. So here we are performing an Autodiscover, and then we'll see if it can find an Exchange service URL for our target mailbox of John Doe at PowerShellBlogger.com. In this case, Autodiscover is looking at autodiscover.powershellblogger.com, and then that entry will be a C name for Office 365, and that's where it's doing the redirection. This is a slow, you can imagine doing the problem with Autodiscover, as you can see, it's slow, so it took 49 seconds to find and populate its URL. So if you're doing this across thousands of mailboxes, it really slows it down. If you can pre-populate and that's what I did in a multi-front-end environment, I basically had a list of these users all use this front end, these users all use this front end, because what we can do instead of using Autodiscover is we can just hard code it. So we'll just take this out and we'll just say this is its front end, and then you can see the time savings you get. Took less than a second. Next thing we want to do is, so far we're connecting to the target mailbox. We have our Exchange credentials, but we still, if we're impersonating the user, we still have to let the script know. So under this Exchange service object that we created, we use impersonate user ID, SMTP address, along with the target mailbox. Now we're going to connect to John Doe as the impersonation service. So now we have to create objects to store the data. We want to basically get calendar items, but we have to do a few things. So I'm grabbing, some of this stuff isn't necessary, but I'm grabbing subjects, iCal UIDs, so that I can have some properties that I can display. Technically, you actually don't even need these. All you really need is calendar items. But I want to show you how you can use different properties of calendar items in reporting and logging. Now we can have a collection of these objects and we can list their subjects. That's what we'll do. So now we've created our objects to store the data. Now we have to basically connect to the mailbox and calendar itself and get a view. So here we're pre-setting up our view of, we're saying only do 500 items in this data item view. We specify the properties that we're collecting, subject, the start and end time of the calendar items, and the iCal UID. Technically, you don't need this, but I'm adding it so that we can, if we're going to log all this stuff, it's really helpful if you can catalog exactly what you deleted in the start and end times of these meetings. Otherwise, it's just good data to have. But there's a lot of other data other than that. If you wanted to collect, what you do is from the command line here, we can just look at all the different properties of a calendar item, and you can add any of them to your view. So now we have to bind to the calendar folder. So here we're hitting the target mailbox. The well-known folder of calendar, and we're binding to the Exchange service and the folder ID. And the folder ID is the calendar folder. Now, let's go ahead and list. So we would have collected all these calendar items now, but basically they're just stored in memory and we can't see them. So we're going to go ahead and use this loop to show what calendar items are in the mailbox. So we'll just go ahead and run this. So here's our meetings we found in John Doe's calendar. Monday all-day event, test Wednesday reoccurring, Tuesday afternoon event, Monday reoccurring meeting, and Friday test meeting. Now now that we have these calendar items, we want to take action on them. And we can do that here. We have to create this item list, and there might be other ways of doing this. I just copied documentation on how to delete these items from C# and I converted it to PowerShell. And I played around with trying to make sense of it in like a little bit easier method, but this is the only way I could get it to work. But what you're doing is you're creating a list, and then what deletes them here is what we do next. So we're looping through each item in calendar items, and we created the calendar items here when we looped through the view of each item in the results, and the results came from the view of the folder calendar. So we just write output deleting, and then we'll put the item in subject so we know what we're deleting. Then this is where you can basically say what to do. This void just doesn't return anything. Doesn't return a value of success or anything. This is, we're deleting the item. So in the Exchange service, we delete the item method. We are feeding it the delete IDs, which is this list we created. We soft delete it, so you can soft delete, hard delete, or this method here, you can look up the different options. There's 3 or 4. And we send to all and save a copy. So this is where we don't just delete it, we actually delete it and send to everyone on the invitation that you've canceled the meeting. So we run this, and it goes as planned. Well, 5 calendar entries, and there it goes. Deletes our 5 meetings, 5 calendar events canceled. So let's go ahead, make sure that worked. So we'll log into John Doe. So here's our acceptances that we got from me on the other meetings. We'll check out my calendar. my calendar's blank. So canceled all the meetings. Back to my mailbox. Here's all my cancellations that I sent out, all at 6:59. So we'll go ahead, we'll log into the other account.
If you didn't pick that send to all, then you wouldn't have anything in your send items and the.
Yeah, if you wouldn't have sent to all, it would have been a delete without notifying recipients. So no one would know it was canceled. So here it is. We got our cancel. These are cancellation notices where you can remove the series from your calendar. If I go to my calendar, it's going to show canceled. So these are all canceled. So the user knows it's canceled, and if they want to remove them from the calendar, which is what users usually do when they get that in the mailbox, they'll just remove series from calendar. Remove from calendar, remove from calendar. And then you go to the calendar. So now that user knows, like, okay, that meeting's canceled, and they can choose whether they want to remove it from their calendar or not. Which is the whole point of sending out the cancellations. And room mailboxes will process that cancellation and free the calendar up that day up with the room booking attendant. It'll take that cancellation and free the room up. So that's how we basically, during a layoff, how I was able to save a lot of time and effort by processing all the mailboxes this way. You can take what's here and expand upon it. I'll show you the one I created. I kind of expanded on. This is kind of like the bare minimum. The bare minimum really would be you wouldn't really need the subject iCal UIDs. You would essentially just need this, and you'd be able to run this script and get everything deleted. But I'll show you the one I made here. Which has a lot more options. So go to the console. We'll go remove all appointments. So I just added a bunch of options. So you can. Here's where we can feed in things. So we could, for instance, you could import CSV, items. And then you could feed it to the PowerShell script. But we'll just show you how it can be done here. So that's the one I want to connect to. If you wanted, you could specify the folder paths. Remember, I specified calendar, hard-coded calendar in here. You could put inbox or other items. You can search public folders, provided credentials. So specify the username, so you don't have to specify it. I think I put password in here. Domain, whether you want to impersonate or not. Your Exchange Web Services URL, so this is where you could just put in that EWS path. If you want to ignore SSL certificate errors, allow insecure redirection, and just kind of shows you how you can make one script, and instead of editing this one script, now it comes a little bit more portable, and you can use it in other environments in any situation, and just feed it what you want it to do instead of coming in here and having these hard-coded values. Gives you some flexibility. So I'll go back to the presentation here. Actually, so just a little, there are some challenges with Exchange Web Services. Most of the code samples are in C#, so it's good to learn some C# syntax. If you're trying to debug this stuff, it's like really hard in PowerShell to do that. So it's good to have a copy of Visual Studio, even Express, so that you can walk through the code and understand why it's failing, or where it's failing, or what's happening with the objects. It might be easier to get your examples running in C# first, depending on what you're trying to do, and then convert it, translate that into PowerShell, and just search, find other people's examples, and then alter them to fulfill your needs. So you could take what someone else did, and if it's close enough but you want to take a different action on it, you can just use it and adapt it. So a lot of the stuff I created, sometimes I'll find someone else's work that I kind of like what he did better, and then I'll just incorporate that into my script. So we have any questions? Does anyone think that they find or would ever do? Does anyone see or can list examples that they've seen where Exchange Web Services may have helped you in the past?
It does. The only time I've ever used it to get out of the bind is like the CEO left for vacation without saying anything, and we sent their out of office message through Exchange Web Services. But other than that, I've poked around with it, but I haven't gotten into it too heavily. But this remove calendar entry stuff seems useful.
Yeah. It comes in most of the time. It's ad hoc stuff that is just one person, two person. Like if there's just a couple people involved, it's easier just to jump into someone's mailbox and take action on it as an administrator, and you can just find all their entries and cancel them. But you take the amount of time on that one user and out over multiple times, and it'd be way faster to use a script, or add this to the process of when a person leaves the company, this gets run, and it just keeps your calendar items clean. Or if you have to do any sort of mass change across, like with a layoff or some of the other examples, then
mergers, acquisitions, things
yeah,
like that are a big benefit to that. Like somebody leaves, somebody gets fired. This is just the thing you do.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go in and change his password, log into his mailbox, and do anything like that. Seems to be a lot easier.
Yeah. So I'll just list some resources that will help you out. This is the MSDN for exploring Exchange Web Services Managed API. That has a lot of great documentation on what you can do. This Glenn's Exchange dev blog is probably the best place to go for examples of PowerShell and C# on how to do a ton of stuff in Exchange, and I'll show you a little bit of that here.
Like I kind of set up the thing where that's sufficient patches. So he's got to get it to shut down the services on one, pull the patches down, make sure everything's done, and then tell the other server, okay, now you go.
So this is his blog, and just through Exchange Web Services, he has it all listed in PowerShell. And any other place is going to have it in C#, and he has it in both usually. And enumerating all items in any folder, like just all these little things that you'd have a hard time doing or finding out. He's pretty much put up a ton of good examples.
The user able to do this against their own mailbox.
A user would, yeah, you could, what you would do, you don't even need to list you could use your logged in credentials, and you wouldn't even have to list a username and password if you're acting on yourself. So if you could, in my script, you could just use integrated authentication instead of a username and password here. You wouldn't need to impersonate. You would just use integrated credentials here and to connect to web services, and you're done. So you could have a script run as a user to do things like you could add it to a login script or something, and every user would just connect as themselves, make a change, and they wouldn't even know. So I guess the answer is yes. And there might be like good avenues of doing that. The other one I wanted to show you, there's this EWS editor tool that's really good, and basically it connects to mailboxes using Exchange Web Services. So this is its website, and its goals demonstrate EWS functionality and simplicity to developers through its source code. It really helps. I don't know if you've used NFC Mappy. That uses the Mappy profile to connect. This uses Exchange Web Services to connect. And I have it. I'll launch it.
It looks to be that way.
So I kind of showed you how we set what version of Exchange we use. So here's all the different versions. So 2016, and basically each version just has additional functionality that the client can do, EWS can do. If you're on 2007, you can't do a whole bunch. And there's some documentation out there, slides from previous TechNets and stuff that say what was added with each version. Most people are on 2010 SP2, I find, or newer, and hopefully, and if they're not, they're usually trying to get on to Exchange Online if they're anything older. So we'll go ahead. Let's just use the 365 one to save some time. We'll put in our credentials here that we had. Our impersonation credentials. Put in the password. And we want to connect to John Doe. So here it is. Now we're essentially, you could use this essentially as a way to quickly jump into people's mailboxes, and you get like a debug view of their mailbox. This is where you would find those SharePoint lists. I think actually it was in the root of the inboxes where those SharePoint lists were. Here. So here's my inbox of John Doe. Here's that test email. You can see all the attributes of the message. If you're working with this stuff, you can see the item class. So if you're an Exchange administrator, you'll know item class if you're ever trying to target certain types of items to do retention on. You can essentially have a retention type for any type of item class. So you might want voicemails to be 30 days, and you might want calendar entries to be 2 years, and it just really opens up a lot of options. And remember how we added the iCal UID in the subject to be able to key off of? Well, you have all the other attributes of these objects that you can work with. So it's a really good tool to jump in and get a deep view. Sometimes, and it's more rare now, but working with Outlook back with Exchange 2010 when it first came out, Outlook 2010, there would be corrupt entries in the mailbox, and it would mess up the OST file every time I tried to download it. I'd have to use MFC Mappy or this to go in and get rid of it so that the user could work. And even moving the mailbox is supposed to get rid of corrupt items, but it doesn't always. So that's a really good tool. And I think I have a couple more. This Exchange team blog is a good one. It basically keeps you up to date on any changes to Exchange Online or Exchange on-prem, and might affect your scripts and how you connect. I use basic authentication with username and password. You can use what's called OAuth. That's their recommended way. We didn't cover it here. It takes a little bit longer to set up, but it's a little bit better way to connect to Exchange Online, depending on if you're going to use this ad hoc or implement it on a scheduled basis. Impersonation and EWS and Exchange, that's a good to understand, just being able to connect as other users. And the Office Dev Center has a ton of code samples, similar to basically all code samples for Office, for connecting Exchange Online and doing things. It's all, unfortunately, in C#. I think that covers it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Cool. Thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, guys. Hope you find this useful, or at least you know what's possible with this solution and being able to apply it in different situations.
It's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay, have a good one.
Two. All right. Anything else? Anybody got any other issues? We got about exactly half an hour left. Any other things that they're struggling with, they're working on, and hitting a brain wall?
We're trying to bring in one of the guys from Market stuff to PowerShell. New guy. So I gave him some pointers to websites to get some good music out. We actually had it download and reboot a server. Accidentally.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where it gets really interesting, and I'm kind of at my current place. We're starting to get to the point where we want to kind of control what's being run, and at least understanding, okay, who ran it, when did they run it, what did they run it against, what exactly did they run. So somebody they wrote it all in PowerShell, which should have been more of kind of like a C# app, I think, but like a remote execution engine. And now it has more than just tracking of what ran. The nice thing is our environment's pretty large. Large in the sense that I think we have about 3,000 Windows machines and about 3,000 Linux boxes now. So we have two separate teams. We're a very different type of organization in that we have about 50-50 when it comes to the mix. So Linux can't dictate to Windows what to do, and Windows can't dictate to Linux what's going to be done. Right? So Linux guys use Ansible to do some of their stuff, and obviously they use Python and Perl and those kinds of things. So we wrote this remote execution piece for the Windows side of PowerShell. We heavily leverage PowerShell. But it is able to basically parallel a bunch of these jobs at the same time. So it's not one way to do that in PowerShell now is by using sessions. You set your sessions at the very beginning, and then you run that invoke command across to that session, and the session kind of handles all of that. But this breaks it out even further, where we then can say the sessions will only run a certain number at a certain time. And this breaks it out even further using run spaces. I don't know if you've done much or know much about runs. So they're very different than the normal PowerShell, but if you're not leveraging a lot of extra things within the PowerShell shell, then they're great. It leverages the typical PowerShell commandlets. They may behave just a slight bit differently, some of them, with regards to variables and how run spaces works. Some of the times you may get unexpected results back, just because of the way that memory, there is kind of a bug, I think, at least a couple of years ago, there was a reported bug with that. Anyways, it allows you to do a lot of parallelization. We used it 2 years ago. Every year we do a power down with all of our stuff. And it was the first time I introduced everybody to run spaces, because we have to shut all these boxes down very quickly. And we want to make sure that they shut down. So I wrote 2 jobs. 1, the shutdown command, and 2, the ping command. Well, it's very important in the ping, because if I have to shut down 2,000, 3,000 boxes, I don't want to wait for that ping to time out for most of them.
Or times you do single ping or 2 pings.
We do single ping or 2 ping and get those results back, and then we know now, and then I can build my run space. I can run 200 at a time, and that 5 seconds that it takes for the timeout to happen is now, I can leverage that much, much better. Run spaces you can also tweak to know where your efficiency is going to be. Because sometimes if you say, oh, I want 1,000 run spaces, well, what's interesting is that your peak number could be 450.
Right,
then you start decreasing in efficiency. So where that 450 number is, like, you max out, it only takes me two minutes to run a ping sweep of the entire environment. If I use 1,000, because I have 2,000 machines, that should decrease by a minute, right? Well, it goes up by 2 minutes. So there's some efficiencies there.
So it's like virtualizing it kicks up multiple copies of scripts in its own space.
Yes, you have to do it, but yes, yeah. So you can look it up. There's a bunch of stuff out there on it.
Because I know, like, I have a thing I will go out and check. Last time the system booted, does it have a pending reboot from the patches? What's the last time the patch installed? Things like that. And I found that if you let it just run, like you say, pick everything, it'll take like 2 hours.
Right.
So I said, you know what, I'll run it on this group, and I'll open another copy of the script, and I'll run it on this group. So the run space would probably work better for that.
That, or you can kind of have, the way that I kind of would say, and what I try to drive people towards, is build it as a function, right? Build that check as a function. Or it's a bunch of different functions that will do that check. And then you can wrap those things up in a larger script, and you can then run the grouping automatically in the script. So you can then say, spin up this PowerShell window and run this script against these host names, right? Because now these functions have the parameters that you want to give it. And I do that a lot I work mostly in the VMware space now, and they didn't really have a good tool set, so I'm doing a lot of PowerCLI. And I write all functions. I don't really write scripts anymore, just because the tool set that the organization had beforehand was all scripts, and they didn't scale. So I just say, all right, I'm accepting either a host object or a VM object in most cases. If you don't give me one of those two things, I'm not going to run anything. One, it keeps me from having to do air checking. Is that thing really alive? Is it on? Is it not on? You know, there's just a lot of things I don't have to worry about now because you front-loaded all of that. It's another good reason of why once you get the basics of understanding of data structures and algorithms within PowerShell, I will drive people more on the advanced side of using functions. We've even gone so far in some of our functions of using dynamic parameters. So I'm trying to get the guy that did that come in and present on it, because it's really cool. It's really fun. It's complicated, but it's a nice little thing. What else was I going to say? Oh, just this week at work, I started using the Visual Studio Code. I don't know if you guys have heard of this or talked about it. I know we talked about it here like a couple months ago, I think. Or just last month. I don't remember which.
I know we were talking about, I think last month, there was something about the Visual Studio component that could be loaded.
Yeah, so alright, come on, Safari. You probably want me to go that first. I know. So it is for all intents and purposes straight up an editor. It doesn't have the huge overhead that Visual Studio does, and it's free. The nice thing is it does do IntelliSense, and it does.
Yeah, this was definitely.
Yeah, it does do IntelliSense.
And it does a little bit faster.
Yeah, and so I'm just starting to get into it. The nice thing, and I'm getting ready to play with, we use Perforce for our source control, and it's another thing that I'm pretty big on within the organization is I'm trying to push people into using source control for your stuff, which and does two things: makes them write code better, that's a little more scalable, and keeps their scripts kind of to themselves, into their little spaces, but drives them into, if you wanted this to be leveraged to a larger group, then you need to source it. You need to source control your stuff. And we have two spaces. We have our module space, and then our maintenance and kind of other jobs that will be like scripts that may leverage the modules, or something that just doesn't make sense as a function or part of a module.
And somebody makes a change.
Right. Well, and exactly. Somebody changed the script that you were used to using, and now it's like, oh, you can roll it back. You can do a lot of different things. You can see what they did. But the nice thing is it has workspaces off to the left-hand side here in this view, and before, because I was just using the ISE, and it's decent. And depending on how you work, so I have the guy who's doing the dynamic parameters. He leverages the ISE to even run his code, which I don't like doing. I know a lot of people will do it that way. I don't like doing it that way because the ISE can behave differently than the shell. But he does it that way because he uses System Center Orchestrator, and Orchestrator uses the ISE context for running PowerShell.
I do that. I have scripts that I run, that I write, that I've done like .NET. It doesn't run same. It doesn't work under regular PowerShell. Because I'm leveraging OGV and stuff like that.
Okay.
It just doesn't.
So OGV, so on a host, when you run like OGV, you have to have the ISE portion installed. which all it's doing, I think it's building the framework, like the WMF stuff that's kind of there, then only under the IC.
It's there, like if you run it on PowerShell on the same system instead of under PowerShell ISE.
Really? Interesting.
And it might be the way I wrote the interface. This was a system where, it's like, oh, okay, we're going to run this, and you have to type in, not type in all the servers, but put it to a file that has a list of all the servers you want to run this against. I'm like, I want to make it a little bit more dynamic. I want to either take it from that, or I want to type in or copy a list of servers out of Excel and paste it into that and have it run on that. So I couldn't do both. There was no interface for that, so I wrote one. So, and I can actually, there's a radio button where I can say, I want this or I want that, and the interface changes.
Oh, okay. So are you using OutGrid View for that, or are you using?
That's using, I use .NET.
Yeah, so you're using the
I
.NET
manually
forms.
created
Yeah,
a form,
yeah.
which was a pain in the butt, because
It's not easy. That's where if you're going to do forms and things like that, visualizations, I will shameless plug for the Sapien tool, PowerShell Studio. That'll do it for you. But I'm starting to use code. Not, I think I saw something about it the other day, kind of jogged my memory.
there you go. There you go. Actually, this is one where I can actually just type in the server. Okay. So this is more okay. Browse for file, and I have a predefined location. This normally runs on the server.
Right.
Or I have direct server entry, like just copy and paste it. Local copy out of Excel, paste it right into and also a checkbox would say, if I don't check the box, run minimal scan, like just check the last update, the last time the server was rebooted and get some basic information. Otherwise, run, I think, pull out all the patches, find out the last patch that was installed so you have an idea of when it was done. So it gives you then it outputs it to a CSV and also to a OutGrid view. So you can dynamically, like, when you're looking at all the servers that have patched, go, okay, 2003, don't care about them because they're not patching. So, yeah, okay, I have a pretty good idea of if something is not moving along in the normal process.
Cool. Yeah, that's the beauty of the system is that you can leverage it a lot of different ways. What did I see the other day? I saw something where one of the guys, like I had built this whole kind of automatic generating tool to updating the VM tools and hardware version as we roll updates on the host, those tools and the hardware get out of date. So we wrote this thing so that I was kind of doing it. Worked pretty well. So we were having some problems with it. I wasn't able to spend time on it. And so he just went out and he grabbed a whole new thing and rewrote it all. And it's a very different process than what I was doing. So it's kind of like a really good example of two different ways of accomplishing it.
And right hand, which makes it better.
Yeah, and it really doesn't matter, right? Like, at the end of the day, is it accomplishing the same task? Is it working? Okay, get over yourself and move on. It's basically what I had to tell myself. It's like, who cares if it's yours anymore or not? The point is the tool is the tool, and somebody else is able to leverage that tool and adapt it and make it better. At least that's the purpose, right? So that it works and maybe scales, because your logic, maybe you've been missing something, or when you wrote it, right? And this is the case for me. This worked at that time. The environment changed, and we've been in a state of flux. We're consolidating and doing a lot of work in the VM space. We haven't gone back and revisited some of the tools that we built early on to make our jobs easier, to make sure that it worked. So that's another thing that I want to do is regression testing as you grab an environment. Make sure your tools work as you expect them to. So.
Like, have you ever tried to calculate the third Saturday of the month?
I ever tried to calculate it?
Like, come up with a formula that would give you the third Saturday every time, no matter the 12 month.
I don't think it would. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't think it would be too hard, because
Most everything I've seen is like multiple iterations in order to get to it. There's like Patch Tuesday, they have a thing for that, like second Tuesday. But trying to do like a third Saturday, because especially if you're trying to base it off of this second Tuesday. Second Tuesday is not always a week before, or a week and a half before the third Saturday. It shifts. We've got, like the third Sunday can be before the third Saturday.
right. So you could say that the first day of the month could be the first Tuesday, right?
Could be, or could
Right.
be.
So
Sunday.
the first day of the month is Tuesday. Then the second Tuesday, which is the second week of the month, is going to be, the second
Yeah.
week. Your third Saturday will be after the third Tuesday, not after the first Tuesday. So,
It's it. I looked at it for a while and I'm like, okay, I got this formula, and it was wrong within 1 month.
yeah, so, I don't know. I mean, I know that calculating dates is not always easy. It's definitely not easy math. But I don't know, if you iterate through the month, and then all you gotta do is you can just loop through each day of the month until you hit that third Saturday, and break out of the loop, and then move on to the next one. So kind of two loops.
Yeah, but I was trying to do it like one line, with one formula. Like, I should be able to come up with a formula that does this and this and this. Like, find the difference between first day of the month and the first Saturday. And then it's like, nope.
So if the day of the month starts on Wednesday, then here's the first Saturday, or here's the third Saturday.
Yeah, but that would involve, I was trying to do it like purely math-wise.
Uh-huh.
Okay, this date is, or this day of the month is done.
Okay.
Somebody missed.
Yeah, hey, Greg. The mic muted, if you can hear us. We're almost done. Any other questions, comments? One thing I did want to ask is, we are good to stay. Ryan is, again, he's our Microsoft sponsor. So in order to be able to use the building, we have to have Microsoft sponsor. We're good for June to stay here. Biggest thing for us, though, is how can we attract more people? How can we get more people here? What is it that comments along those would be very, very helpful for us, whether it's either online or here in the building.
Yeah, I'm trying to recruit people from work. So I'm like, okay, you're going up. You're getting into all the PowerShell. Join it from home.
So, suggestions of topics. I think we have the whole year filled out for speakers. I think we're going to try to put that on our webpage as to what our months are going to be, because we know at least who's going to be speaking most of the months and what their topic may be. But it would be helpful for us as leaders to know what will be helpful for you guys, because that's really what is going to get you here. So we want to make it relevant for everybody.
I think everything is monthly. You're looking for ideas.
Well, not even just ideas. Like if what we're doing is good, then great. We just then how do we market ourselves to get more people here? I know that we had a few months where we weren't here in the building, and so I know that kind of changed the dynamic a little bit. I think we're kind of sticking around here. We had most people, here when we went to the city for about 4 months. We didn't have a lot of turnout, so that's kind of why we came back. Plus, people were asking for us to come back, so we're going to go where the people ask.
So are you planning on being in the Malvern office for the next foreseeable future?
That's the plan right now, as long as we have a Microsoft sponsor that lets us in the building, basically.
Right.
I know we'll be here. I'm pretty sure we'll be here for June. That was one of the things that Lito and John and I talked about, is that as long as Ryan, our sponsor, is good, then we'll use Microsoft Office.
You can talk to your Microsoft rep if we need additional sponsors.
Yeah, I'm relatively close. I'm about an hour out of Malvern.
Okay.
So I'd like to join on site, but sometimes timing just doesn't work out.
Sure.
I'm like 15 minutes away, and sometimes it's not easy to get there.
Right.
All right. Anything else? Anybody else have anything else they need? Cool. I'll have to double check what next month is. But it doesn't come to me. I had it at the beginning. I forgot about it. So we'll post it soon.
I'll keep trying to recruit people.
Yeah. So get the word out. I know we've been doing, I think this October it'll be 3 years that we'll have started, that we'll be running this thing. So,
So how many people are in the office there?
so there's 3 of us total right now. I think.
Normally have a bit more.
Yeah, normally there's
6.
6 or 7. I know we were averaging about anywhere between 6 to 12 before. What was that, like last November or something, when we went into the city? So.
Yeah, I just couldn't go there.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, that's.
Yeah, I'm
I
south.
think it's kind of the paradigm, right, where you have people who come here because it's easy to get here,
Right.
and then we were thinking that there were people in the city who couldn't come out here just because it's a tough drive. I'm not going to play that down at all. So.
Now, before joining the meeting, I had to go to a couple different sites to get the link. For instance, I went to PowerShell.org, and it didn't even say anything that you were having a meeting tonight.
Okay.
PhillyPoSH.
So I'll have to check on that.
And I checked Twitter, and Twitter didn't have anything from PhillyPoSH.
Okay.
So I was looking around a number of different places to find if there was a link to the meeting, just because I knew I couldn't be on site.
Yeah.
PhillyPoSH.org.
Well, that's our website. Like that's this group's website. So PowerShell.org should have it posted as well. We try to hit the places we need to for it. I'll have to check because they should be there. So I'll figure out why it didn't happen.
Okay.
And it was just me tonight, and usually I will post because John or Lito is getting everything. He's up front, and tonight I'm up front, so I didn't get a chance to get on Twitter to post the link out to the broader community.
Sure, sure.
I apologize.
If you go to
Something else?
PowerShell or PhillyPoSH.org, that will get you to Eventbrite, which will send you a meeting notice, I think, which generally
With the
has
link.
the link.
Yeah, that is correct. That's how I got it. Something else you want to advertise more for that you can do remote, you can remote into your meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a huge plus where you can get everybody anywhere.
Yeah. So I think, being that it's now May, I think we're probably going to try to hit some of the stuff. I know people's summer schedules kind of get a little wonky, but I think we're going to see what we can do marketing-wise. Like, I call it marketing just because that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
So, see if we can automate some of getting into some of those places as well. Make it a little bit easier on those who are doing the scheduling. So.
All right.
Well, thanks for coming.
Well, sorry I'm
And
late. I
hopefully we'll
missed the
see you
whole
next month.
presentation. All right, very good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.